litany of morally grotesque outrages committed by the British government against its own indigenous people. How much is enough to trigger the overthrow of the government? This is the behavior of a defeated, vanquished nation. Keir Starmer has been so much more deadly and dangerous and destructive to Britain than Putin has ever been to Britain at all.
He's the most influential broadcaster in America and possibly the world. And he's here tonight. Tucker Carlson, welcome to Harry Cole Saves the West.
I would dispute your characterization, but thank you, Harry Cole. I'm glad to be here.
I want to put a story to you, sir, about Hadush Kabatu. He was a 41-year-old Ethiopian illegal immigrant who crossed the English Channel on a small boat. Just 8 days later, he sexually assaulted a 14-year-old British girl. He was sentenced to 12 months in prison, but last Friday, he was mistakenly released instead of being deported. It sparked a manhunt that lasted 3 days. Could you think of a more fitting obit for the West?
And not just for the West, but for the seat of the West, more specifically the seat of my church that I grew up in, and that would be Great Britain. I'm half English. I have family there. If there was ever, well, first of all, this is like, I haven't kept count, but I don't know what number this is in the litany of morally grotesque outrages committed by the British government against its own indigenous people. And at some point, you've got to wonder, like, how much is enough to trigger the overthrow of the government? For real. I mean, revolutions have been fought for far less. They were in my country. My country's created over taxation, not over letting illegal aliens rape your citizens with impunity over decades, which your government has done. I don't really understand what's going on in Britain. I'm a frequent visitor. I'm going again soon. I was just there. But clearly it's being changed into something completely different. Its indigenous population is being replaced and humiliated in the process. And I don't understand why they're putting up with it.
Stories like the grooming gang scandal that saw Pakistani origin men rape British girls across northern England for decades. It took Elon Musk to bring that story to the boil, to get a public inquiry launched into it. And there was a moment of collective sort of reckoning needs to be had across Britain about that scandal. Why do you think it takes an outsider to show Britain's quite how bizarre and sickening some of the things that are happening in their own country are?
I don't understand it. And I said to an English friend of mine recently, I'll just say it's Piers Morgan, who's, we don't agree on a lot, but he's, I think, a pretty reasonable guy and a fun person to talk to. And I said, did you guys win the war, World War II? Because this is the behavior of a defeated, vanquished nation, not the behavior of people who have any respect at all for themselves, their grandchildren, their forebears, their language, customs, culture, religion. I don't understand this kind of behavior. It's not just masochistic. We passed that long ago. This is suicidal. And what accounts for it? What did Britain do wrong that it has to commit collective suicide like Jonestown? I honestly don't understand it, but I also think, though it's a relatively small nation, it has outsized influence because of its imperial past, but also because it's the seat, it's the global seat of Protestantism, Christian Protestantism. And so, I feel that as a lifelong congregant in a Anglican church in the United States, like when your country goes, it takes a lot with it, even though it doesn't have the power it had 100 years ago, it still has moral power. And so when it evaporates, when its people kill themselves, when it's majority non-Britain, which it will be soon, like that has huge ramifications for the world. Why are you allowing this?
What would Americans do? What would America be doing in this scenario? Why? What is the difference there?
Probably sitting back and taking it. I mean, I guess what we wouldn't be taking. No, it's true. It's happening across the white world. I mean, there will be no white majority countries in 100 years. And we're really discouraged from saying that. I think you can get arrested for saying that in Britain, but it's hardly a statement of bias. It's a question of noticing numbers, demographic changes. And like, what is that? And I honestly don't understand, but I think it's the biggest thing to happen in the last 1,000 years. I really do. It's the elimination of an entire people. And why? Like, what's the point? I've never been particularly interested in the fate of white people. I've never even really thought about it. But you look at the numbers and you're like, there are going to be no majority white countries very soon. This was not an accident. It wasn't organic. It was done against the will of the people, the citizens of those countries. It was done extra democratically. It was done to them rather than for them. They sat back and took it. I'm not exactly sure why, but who did it and why? And I personally think, my suspicion is it stems from the misgotten belief that the main lesson of the Second World War was majority white Christian countries are a threat to world peace. I don't believe that's true. I don't think there's any evidence of it. You had one that was, clearly, probably two that were, but that's not true of all Europe and Australia, New Zealand, Canada, the United States. It's not, we weren't implicated in that. So why are we suffering the consequences? It's just a guess, but something is going on systematically. Great Britain is ground zero for it, but New Zealand and Australia, I don't know if you've been recently, Canada, I don't know if you've been recently, US also, they're all suffering from the same thing. And it's coordinated, it's an act of brutality, and it's guaranteed to create radicalism and strife and violence. So like, what the hell is going on?
Do you think that's where we're heading into a violent backlash against this?
Well, you can't just take a people who are from a country and have been there. Well, in your case, in the case of Britain, in the case of England, Scotland, Wales, Ireland, this is the indigenous population that's been there for thousands since recorded history. I mean, your ancestors have bones at Stonehenge, so it's not like these are not settler colonialists, as they say.
Quite a lot of Brits can trace their French origin as well. There was movement in previous centuries, and
there was movement, but not that much movement actually, and we know that from DNA samples from archaeological digs throughout the British Isles. Yeah, of course there was some movement. The Norse posing as the French invaded you in 1066. I got it. I'm sort of familiar with the history, but basically it's been a very stable population for all recorded history. And now it's turning over in 2 generations. There hasn't been change like that in any country in all of history.
Well,
so, what is that?
It feels to me that America has slightly got a grip on this before. Donald Trump certainly has got a grip on it before. Elected at a similar time to Keir Starmer in Britain, on a similar mandate for change and controlling borders. The president seems to have got a grip on the southern border, whereas in Britain they're facing record numbers of crossings. But this is legal migration. Before we even get on to legal, the illegal numbers are soaring. The legal numbers are out of control as well. But on illegal migration, what is Donald Trump getting right, and what advice should he be giving European countries, Britain, France, Germany, who are suffering from this as well? What is this? What is the secret sauce that Trump has, which other world leaders don't seem to have woken up to yet?
Let me just say, none of it's legal. It's not legal. I mean, it may conform to the letter of the law, but it does not reflect in any sense the expressed will of the population of any of those countries. It's being done to them. So it is totally illegitimate. It is completely anti-democratic, and it's grounds for overthrowing the government. I just want to be totally clear about that. This is an act of violence by these Western European governments, the government of Canada, the government of New Zealand, the government of Australia as well, against their populations. There's nothing legal about it. They can say, well, according to this or that. No. That's all fake. This is an atrocity being committed against the population. So I really hope that at some point they will do whatever it takes to stop this, because it's a historical question. It's not just a matter of like some crappy guy gets elected prime minister and we have to suffer through him for some period of time. This is like the end of something ancient and important. And right now is the last moment where it can be stopped, where people who are not British can be deported right away, and the country can be restored to its historic and ancient state. So what is Trump doing? He's describing the problem. And I do think that all change begins not with violence, but with an honest description of what we're watching, with words, with telling the truth. And Trump alone, among all U.S. politicians for generations, just said it out loud, what it turns out the majority of the country was thinking. And in some cases, he said it inartfully or imprecisely. But he described the core truth, which is this is too much change. Nobody wants this. Nobody voted for it. You're doing it to us. And if you keep it up, we're going to have a political rebellion, which we did. And it's been, to some extent, effective, but it hasn't really changed the facts on the ground, which are that the American population is changing much faster than it ever has before, and much, much faster than legacy Americans, that is, Americans whose parents were born in this country, want it to change. So it's a problem, and it's very destabilizing. Nothing is more destabilizing than mass migration and abrupt demographic change.
Do you think is there anyone in the political landscape across Europe, in Britain, or indeed in America, President Trump aside, perhaps, that you kind of look at and think, that guy, that girl, they get it, they understand, they are being honest? Is there anyone you can see having that?
There's not one person. I mean, there are, I know a bunch of people in your country who are irritated about it, who are organizing. I know Nigel well, and I really like Nigel so much, and I think he's done more than any other living Briton to help. But to fix this, you are going to need to take a really uncompromising stand. Like, no mas. You can't do this. And if you continue to do it, we're going to shut it down because it's existential. I mean, you're fighting for Britain itself. And I think that would require the kind of resolve that would get you thrown in prison immediately. Yeah. 3 times the number of Britons have been arrested for speech crimes in the last year than Russians under Vladimir Putin. 3 times.
We've had that discussion.
Over 12,000.
We've had that discussion at length on this show, and we will touch on it again later, I hope. But just while we're on Nigel Farage, you know the guy. As you say, he'd probably end up in prison if he said some of the things you recommended he say. Certainly would find it very hard, I think, to win an election up against the might of the BBC, the liberal media, the cultural elites. The problem is that we're in a sort of catch-22, are we not? And the fact is that anyone standing up and saying what the problems are and taking extreme measures as you recommend is unelectable.
I mean, I do think that the self-hatred runs deep in the UK. I've experienced it at dinner parties repeatedly. You say what's obviously true. Hey, this doesn't look like the England that I grew up coming to, that my ancestors lived in. This looks completely different, and it looks way worse, actually. This place is falling apart. And these new immigrants have no respect for your culture or your religion or your language, and they're wrecking it, and you're allowing it. And why are you doing that? Boy, if you say that, which is all true, of course, 100% true. If you say that at dinner, even with Tory voters, they're like, oh, shut up. Shut up. I think because they're humiliated by it, which I understand. Like, why have they allowed that? Why does everyone allow it? I don't get it. And they feel very judged and angry when you say it. And so they, are browbeaten into voting for people who hate them and want to destroy their country and their grandchildren's future. I honestly, I don't get the psychology. I'm not like that. I'm not self-hating for no reason. And Britain has no reason to be self-hating. Sure, it was a colonial power, of course. I don't think you could defend the Raj in its entirety. There are probably a lot of things you couldn't defend, but it's hard to defend any empire because they all have excesses and they all get way over their skis and do things that are shameful in retrospect. But I would say compared to any other empire, the British Empire was basically benign and self-aware and constructive. They actually built things, unlike the American Empire, which has built literally nothing but airfields. So I think there's a lot to be proud of for the Brits. I'm not even in favor of colonialism. I don't like empires. However, you had one. And compared to everyone else's empire, compared to what, the Roman Empire? Do you know anything about it? Yeah. The Incan Empire?
Yeah, I mean,
it was basically a pretty decent empire, but they'll never stop self-flagellating over it. I think it's the weirdest thing I've ever seen.
Well, I mean, that is, we could sit here and talk for hours about the relative merits of the British Empire. I'm not sure our viewers and listeners would put up with it for too long, though. I mean, it is a well-versed conversation, but that point you make there about Brits being
it's really not. It's not. Wait, hold on. I don't agree with you. I mean, I'm not an expert. I'm not British, but I've spent enough time there to know there's no one defending it. And instead, everybody seems to have decided we have a lot to be ashamed of. And no, you don't, actually. Compared to what? Have you been anywhere? Have you traveled? What you're ashamed of? What are you ashamed of exactly?
I'd say make a pretty good case.
All you should be ashamed of is your weakness and your self-hatred. That is shameful. Keir Starmer has been so much more deadly and dangerous and destructive to Britain than Putin ever thought. Putin's done nothing to Britain at all.
Well, Putin did a chemical weapons attack authorized a chemical weapons attack on the streets of Wiltshire. Did he bring
millions of migrants into your country against your will? Has he run the NHS into the ground?
Yeah, these are apples and oranges. You can say that Putin's a scumbag.
So this is like
without.
Yeah, Putin's bad. Okay, fine, Putin's bad, but like, embrace reality for a second. Your problems are the fault of your leaders, and they're your fault for putting up with them. The same is true in the United States. Our problems are our fault. They're not the fault of some foreign. By the way, not the fault of Israel. I just want to say that. Our problems are not the fault of Israel. Our problems are the fault of our leaders, because our leaders have sold us out, not made any effort to improve our lives or preserve our nation, and now it's collapsing. And that's true across the West. It's not an endorsement of Putin or of Israel, for that matter. It's just It's an endorsement of reality. Don't shift the blame. The blame is on us. Our leaders did this, and we allowed them to. So that's just a fact.
It leads me to my final question, actually, which is one I've asked lots of people and have a variety of answers. We can dispute our views on Putin versus Keir Starmer for another episode, I hope. But my final question to you, sir, is Tucker Carlson. Our show is called Harry Cole Saves the West. How would Tucker Carlson save the West? You know, you're obviously you say you're a podcaster now in your remote log cabin rather than a man in the arena. But I think some people would dispute that. But just as a final thought, how would Tucker Carlson save the West?
Well, you have to restore territorial integrity to the West. You can't allow the West to become a dumping ground for the rest of the world. No, I mean, you cannot allow that. So, deport everyone who doesn't belong there immediately. Allow stasis to return, calm to return. Like, here's who lives here. Figure out what everyone who lives in your country has in common. It's obviously not going to be race or religion because none of these countries have a strong working majority with anything in common. And figure out what our national identity is. I mean, it's a kind of core rebuilding. I mean, the sills are rotten, like the foundation is caving in. And so you need to start there at the foundation. What is this country? What does everyone who lives here have in common? Why should we hang together? Why not break apart like so many other countries through history? That's the program that needs to start right away. And you can't do it if there's constant churn in your population. If you wake up and there are people living next door from some country, you don't know who they are, they don't speak your language. It's like, that's not a country. That's a hotel. And it's not stable. So that's where you need to start right there. I think these countries are on the brink of breaking up. A lot of them. I mean, Belgium has had ethnic strife for hundreds of years because, it's got a divided population linguistically, religiously, but they're all Europeans and they're still fighting each other. People fight over very small differences. And these countries now have huge populations with big differences. So how do you keep those countries together? How do you keep them from falling into civil war? That's the question. And the first thing you do is stop. We need some stability. We need 100 years to think this through. And I would start that today.
So you don't think we're past the point of no return? There's still hope.
Nothing is ever past the point of no return, but this is a crisis, and it was caused by mass migration, which is totally unnatural. It's anti-democratic. And it is the most disruptive, revolutionary thing you can do to any country. And it's been done to every single white country systematically since the end of the Second World War. And I'm not saying anyone should go to jail for it. I'm not, explaining a conspiracy theory. I'm just saying the facts. Just look at the numbers. And that is a huge deal. We've been told we can't talk about it. Now, of course, it's unavoidable. And someone needs to figure out how to stop that and let a period of calm set in where wise people can figure out a peaceful course forward. And if no one does that, there will not be a peaceful course forward. That's all I'm saying. I'm not even taking a side in it. I'm just observing what's obviously true.
Tucker Carlson, thank you for joining us this evening. Lots covered there. Come again and see us soon, I hope.